The current gate that is seen today was rebuilt by Suleiman the Magnificent.
Here we go, friends.
Oh, God's name in the Bible is spelled with Yud, Hey.
If the gate said to open only when Jesus returns has truly opened, what does that say about the moment humanity is standing in? For centuries, a gate in Jerusalem stood sealed in silence, stone upon stone, as though history itself were guarding a sacred secret. Ancient prophecies declared that this gate would open only at a very specific moment, one tied to the return of Jesus. And now, as images and reports begin to spread, the world is left to wonder, are we witnessing a sign, or merely a coincidence of our time? If this is your first time here, take a moment to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel because what you're about to hear may completely change how you understand the times we are living in. We stood before the Eastern Gate, also known as the Golden Gate. It faces directly toward the Mount of Olives, looking down over the Kidron Valley, as if its gaze has never left that place. For more than 500 years, this gate has not moved at all, not because of security, not because of time, but because people believed that no mortal hand was allowed to touch it. Empires have risen and fallen. Wars, earthquakes, reconstruction. Jerusalem has changed without ceasing. Only this gate has remained silent, shut, waiting. Some believe that this silence is not an ending, but a held breath before a moment in time. And then, on a morning that seemed ordinary, the silence of centuries was broken. No announcement had been made beforehand. No fences, no signs suggesting that any kind of repair work was underway. Yet on that morning, the Eastern Gate, which had stood still for so many centuries, began to change. Stones once considered immovable showed clear cracks. Some sections shifted out of their old positions, as if the structure had just been struck by a force no one could see. Those who were there said it all happened very quickly, not like a controlled demolition, and not like the familiar tremors Jerusalem had experienced before. What confused people most was not just the cracks in the stone, but their timing. A completely ordinary morning, with no warning, no alert. Then came silence. There was no official statement, no explanation from the authorities or local officials. While images and video clips began to circulate among witnesses, mainstream media barely mentioned the event. The Eastern Gate was still there, familiar yet strange, as if it had just crossed an invisible boundary. We did not rush to assign any meaning to it. We simply noted that a place once believed to be unchanging was no longer entirely the same. After that moment, the atmosphere around the Eastern Gate changed noticeably. The people standing nearby did not speak much to one another, as if each one was trying to understand what they had just seen. Some stood motionless, eyes fixed on the stones that were now out of their familiar alignment. Some took out their phones to record, not to share immediately, but as if to convince themselves that the moment was real. Time passed, yet no forces arrived to cordon off the area, and no one ordered people to leave. The city continued its daily rhythm, while the Eastern Gate quietly carried a question with no answer. What unsettled many was not the cracks themselves, but the absence of an explanation. In an age when nearly every event is analyzed and commented on almost instantly, this silence stood out even more. No one stepped forward to say it was just a technical incident, and no one confirmed that it was the result of a natural cause. The Eastern Gate remained there, uncovered, unrepaired, like an ellipsis, in the middle of history. And it is that incompleteness which keeps the memory of that morning from fading easily, because sometimes the most haunting thing is not what happened, but the fact that no one speaks about it. And then, in the midst of that silence, those who were present began to say that they had not only seen the change, they had heard it. That morning carried no sign of what was about to happen. No unusual movement, just the familiar rhythm of Jerusalem. Then, from the direction of the ancient wall, a deep, low sound rang out, not sharp, not violent, but heavy and slow, as if the earth itself had just exhaled. The ground shook very slightly, just enough to make people stop mid-step. Every gaze immediately turned toward the eastern gate, which, for generations, had existed only as part of the past. The massive stone blocks began to move from their positions. Not with noise, not with the drama of a collapse, but with each stone separating, cracking, revealing gaps where before there had been absolute closure. Dust filled the air. Some instinctively stepped back, others stood still as if held in place. The gate once considered untouchable was no longer shut. What sent chills through many was the coincidence of the timing. Just minutes earlier, a few tour guides had still been saying that this place would remain closed until the day the Messiah returns. And then, like an answer without words, the stones began to part. The reactions were anything but uniform. Some people burst into tears, some fell to their knees, others simply lifted their phones in silence, as if to capture a moment they themselves did not yet understand. No machines appeared, no workers showed up either before or after. When the dust settled, the eastern gate stood exposed, opened in a way no one had anticipated. The city continued to move, but that area did not. People remained there, whispering, praying, asking one another the same question. If this was not the intervention of human hands, then what exactly had we just witnessed? That moment did not only make many people look back at the gate behind them, but also unconsciously turn their faces toward the opposite direction, where the Mount of Olives stood quietly, as if it had never been outside this story from the very beginning. From the eastern gate looking out, the Mount of Olives appears clearly, not off by a single step. The distance between the two is not far, but that perfect alignment made many who stood there pause longer than usual. According to the Bible, the Mount of Olives is the place where the Lord will return. And what draws people's attention is not just the prophecy, but the geographical fact. From every direction around Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives directly faces only one gate, the Eastern Gate. No detours, no deviation, as if that path had been laid out long before any wall was ever built. It was precisely this alignment that once filled people with fear. In the 16th century, when Jerusalem was under Ottoman rule, the Eastern Gate was not sealed because of war or defense. It was deliberately closed. Large stones were stacked upon one another, sealed with thick mortar, leaving no passage at all. Not only that, a cemetery was built directly in front of the gate, like a final barrier. People believed that in doing so, they could block the path of prophecy. But over time, that very act of sealing the gate became the clearest evidence that human beings had once tried to control what they were never sure they could truly prevent. The Eastern Gate stood there, facing the Mount of Olives, bearing both the fear and the longing of many centuries, and no one could say for certain where the line between the two lay. As the images and testimonies began to spread, the first reaction was not agreement, but division. The same phenomenon, the same space, yet two entirely different perspectives quickly formed. For some, what was happening near Jerusalem could not be considered random. For others, it was merely the result of nature, time, and aging structures. Neither side was silent, yet neither side could produce evidence strong enough to end the debate. Those who believe look at the chain of events as a whole. They do not speak only of a single crack, a tremor, or an isolated political upheaval, but of the convergence of many elements in the same period. To them, History rarely sends signals through direct blows. It tends to whisper, to repeat, and to layer. A slight tremor may mean nothing if it occurs elsewhere. But in Jerusalem, a place so often regarded as the center of sacred turning points, every change carries an added layer of meaning. For them, this is not a conclusion, but a beginning. Not a declaration, but a reminder that something is moving. Many in this group also admit that science can explain each individual phenomenon. Political tensions can be placed in a historical context. But what makes them pause is the coincidence in timing. When too many things change at once, in the same place, they find it difficult to believe that everything is merely accidental. For them, faith does not deny science. It begins in the spaces science has not yet fully filled. On the other side, the skeptics view the events through a different lens. They emphasize that Jerusalem lies in a region of complex geological activity, and small tremors are not unusual. Ancient structures, especially stone constructions hundreds of years old, are naturally prone to cracks over time. To them, assigning special meaning to such signs risks blurring the line between observation and interpretation. The skeptics also point out that history has seen many occasions when people read prophetic meaning into natural events, only to realize later that the world continued to run according to its familiar laws. They do not deny the cultural or religious value of Jerusalem, but they argue that it is precisely this symbolic importance that makes people more likely to see signs in the place where they most expect to find them. In their eyes, caution is not a lack of faith, but the only way to avoid rushing into premature conclusions. What is notable is that these two perspectives are not as completely opposed as they might appear. Both believers and skeptics acknowledge that there is not yet enough data to reach a final conclusion. Both sides are reacting to the same reality: a turbulent period in which natural, social, and religious events intertwine more tightly than usual. The difference lies in how they interpret the meaning of that intertwining. Perhaps the more important question is not whether this is a sign or just a coincidence. The real question is why these phenomena are causing so many people to stop and think. Jerusalem, with all its history and symbolism, has always been a place where every change is examined through multiple lenses. There, a slight tremor can be felt as a warning or simply as the movement of rock and earth. Both perspectives coexist, and both reflect the deep anxiety of human beings when they face things that cannot yet be named. Maintaining a balance between faith and skepticism is perhaps the hardest thing to do in moments like this. To believe too quickly can lead to illusion. To doubt absolutely can cause people to ignore questions that ought to be asked. And perhaps, instead of choosing to stand entirely on one side, many people remain in the middle, observing, listening, and waiting for more missing pieces to fall into place. Until there is an explanation clear enough, what is happening near Jerusalem will remain suspended in uncertainty. For one person, it is the sign of a beginning. For another, it is simply the way nature and time operate. And it is this difference, rather than the phenomenon itself, that most clearly reflects the state of the human heart when facing moments they sense are more sensitive than usual. Some say that, in time, all of this will make sense. Yet, in Jerusalem, where even a small tremor can seem to echo across centuries, truth does not always arrive as a clear, tidy answer. Sometimes it comes in fragments, like scattered ellipses across history, politics, geology, and faith, forcing people to question themselves more than they question the world around them. The Eastern Gate still stands, no longer fully sealed as before, yet not truly open in the way many have long imagined. It rests in between, much like the minds of those who watch it, not at peace enough to dismiss everything as coincidence, but not certain enough to declare that prophecy has begun to unfold. Every crack, Every subtle shift in those stones becomes a mirror, reflecting back the unease, the longing, and the unnamed questions of an entire generation.